Welcome to World Storytelling Day here in Seattle. It's celebrated internationally on the spring equinox, so we're a little bit ahead. But you can read all about the history of this event in our latest newsletter. I've been privileged to be a part of World Storytelling Day here in Germany for the last 15 years or so. And we've told in cafes, on stages, and even an abandoned wine cellar. We've told on the various themes that have been offered: strong women, dragons, and wishes and dreams. It's always been fun, and I'm very appreciative of those who signed up to be on the swap tonight. And most of all, to Pat Peterson, who will be our MC and hostess as soon as I've told the story, I want to say this year's theme is building bridges. And as we know, storytelling does build bridges and fosters understanding. And so with that, I want to thank you for being here tonight and thank Pat for being our MC. She'll shepherd you through the evening after I've told a very short story. So, first story, goat number 1. Liked to go down to the river, cross the bridge, eat the green grass, go home. Goat number 2 liked to go down to the river, cross the bridge, eat the green grass, and go home. One day, both goats went down to cross the bridge. "Hey, you, what are you doing on my bridge?" "It's not your bridge, it's my bridge." "Well, I'm stronger than you, and I want you off." "Well, I don't think so. You get off." Splash! Both goats went home very wet. "He's not a very friendly goat. He is really nasty. He was not cooperative. Man, what a mess." Story number 2, that is to say, second story. Goat number 1, down, cross, and home. Goat number 2, to the river, cross the bridge, and home. One day, they both go down to the river to cross the bridge. Looks like we might have a problem getting across." "You're right, but maybe we can solve it." Let's think. "I know. If we both breathe in, maybe we can squeeze by. I think that might work." And yes, and they both had their grass and went home. Now, what a fine fellow he was. So friendly and cooperative he was. We had a problem and we solved it together. We solved our problem by working together, and we both got our something good out of it. Now, the question is, what kind of goats are we? And that's a story from Margaret Reed MacDonald's book, Peace Tales. And now, Pat, take it away and enjoy the evening, everyone.
Thank you, Judith. The miracles of technology.
Yeah.
It's lovely to be able to embrace them and to have our circle expanded. The theme of building bridges with stories it seems just, of course. I don't know about you, but almost every time I hear a story, something in the back of my head will say, that reminds me of something, some place, some event. And that's the common thing that happens with stories. Our similarities. Stories help us to temper our differences. I've been asked to share some information and a story about Kathy Spagnoli, a longtime member of the Seattle storytelling community, who is no longer with us. Now, I'll give you a little bit of Kathy's history. A name like Spagnoli, one thinks that sounds almost like a lovely Italian pastry. Well, it's true. Her father was Italian, her mother German. And those two nationalities combined to present Kathy Spagnoli with international quests. She grew up in New York and attended college. One thing that I heard and learned about Kathy was that she attended Woodstock, and evidently something sparked her at that event, and she dropped out of college and began to travel. Of course, at that time, she went first to Europe, as so many young people did. But Kathy did not limit herself to those boundaries. She traveled east to Asia. She eventually wound up in Kathmandu, and I'm sure there's a story there. And then she went back to finish her college. And one of the classes that she took involved sign language, and she loved it. And so for a while, she taught children using sign and music and dance. And if you've ever had the pleasure of seeing or hearing Kathy tell, you know that her hands were always an intricate part of the story as she helped us to see it, as she helped those hearing impaired students and people to hear it. Kathy developed a love of Asian culture and history and stories. It was not a strictly sterile sort of academic pursuit that she followed. Kathy followed the stories. She followed the tellers. And those tellers were found in villages and schools and towns and at festivals. I have a feeling Kathy never went anywhere that she didn't come home without a story. She was open with people. They welcomed her into their communities, and that gave her a wonderful foundation for stories from that part of the world. And they were from Japan and Indonesia and Sri Lanka and Thailand, all of those countries. And every time she went to one of those countries, she came back richer for it, and she recorded those stories, not in a mere dry, bare bones way. And she always documented everything. I love that about her work. She would tell you where she heard the story, who she was with, what they ate when she was hearing the story, where she went afterwards, and on and on. And in her books, which are still available, you will find those references. She always gave credit where credit was due, and because of her wonderful research, you could follow along and find out more about anything she shared with us. So I was given the opportunity to share one of her stories. Well, I've known Kathy for a long time. When I lived in West Seattle, I used to run into her when I'd be out doing errands. She and her husband, Shivam, lived on Vashon Island, an island just off the shores of Seattle. And I've always said that island dwellers have a bit of enchantment about them. And certainly that was true of Kathy. So in looking over her stories, I wanted to find one that I could hear her voice in when I read it. And I hope you will enjoy it tonight. The people in a small village in Japan, underneath a huge mountain, believed that at the top of that mountain there lived a creature called the Yamamba. Now, the Yamamba made the people afraid because they thought it had such power over them. When it would rain down heavy on their fields, they'd say, oh, that Yamamba, she loves to torment us. And when the wind would blow hard and flatten the plants, they said, oh, that Yamamba, she likes to tease us. And when the snow would pile up on their houses, they said, oh, that Yamamba, she delights in making things so hard for us. Now, the truth is, no one had ever heard the Yamamba. No one had ever seen the Yamamba. All they knew was what their parents had been told by their parents, and it had been passed on, and so it goes, and so it goes. And then one day, the wind blew hard, and the rain came down, and they heard a terrible noise, and all of a sudden appeared in front of them a huge baby, and it said, I am the Yamamba's new baby, and we want rice cakes, and you had better get them to us or we will eat you all up. And it disappeared up the mountain. Ah, the people said, it's true, the Yamamba, oh, we are so scared, it's going to eat us. Did you see that big baby? Oh, it's going to eat us. Rice cakes. They want rice cakes. Okay, so they got very busy and they pounded the rice and they cooked the rice and they made rice cakes, lots of rice cakes. And when they were done, they said, well, now, look at all these rice cakes. How are we going to get them up to the Yamamba, up on the mountain? Oh, nobody volunteered to go, not a one, until finally, one old woman, don't you know, said, well, I'm old. I have lived a long and good life. And I suppose I am ready to die if need be. So I will take the rice cakes up to the Yamamba. And so it was agreed, and the people came and they put their arms around her and said she was so brave, and they thanked her for the village. And two young men were to take her partway up the mountain to show her the way. And so they left, the old woman carrying the rice cakes. And as they started climbing the mountain, the wind began to blow, and it tossed those young men back and forth and all around. And they said, oh, we can't stand this. And the old woman looked around and they were gone. She did not know if they were blown away or if they had run away. And she was hanging on so tight to a tree, and the wind blew, and still she hung on. And then she began to climb by herself very slowly up that mountain until she came to a clearing. And the wind stopped. The wind stopped, but not the noise. And just then a door opened, and the Yamamba came out and ran right over the old woman, knocking her down. And the Yamamba stopped and said, oh, old woman, oh, I am so sorry. Please, let me help you up. Oh, I am so sorry. And the old woman looked up into the face of the Yamamba with a huge mouth and ugly, sharp teeth. And she closed her eyes, ready to be eaten. And the Yamamba said, "Oh, I am so sorry. I am so sorry. I was on my way to get water. Please, won't you come inside and have a cup of tea?" And the old woman said, "Yes." And so they went inside and sat and drank tea. And after a while, the old woman said, "I have brought you rice cakes." "Oh, wonderful," said the Yamamba, and she gave some to the baby. It was a big baby. And then she said, "Yesterday, when my baby was born, we were so hungry, I told him to fly down the mountain to the village and to ask very politely for some rice cakes. Did he do that?" "Oh," said the woman, "yes, he asked." She did not say how impolitely and terrifying he had asked. She said he had asked. "Oh, good," said the woman. "Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. I am so happy to have met you." And the old woman said, "Well, thank you. It was nice to meet you and your baby too. And now you know, I really must be getting back down the mountain to my village." And the Yamamba said, "Oh no, please don't go. Please don't go, please. I am so tired and having a new baby. If you could stay for a while and help me, that would be very nice." Well, now let me tell you this. That old woman still wasn't too sure about the Yamamba and the possible intentions, but she didn't want to irritate her or upset her or make her angry, so she said she would stay for a while. And she did, for some days. And the woman cooked and cleaned and helped the Mamamba with her new baby, and she became far less frightened as time went by. But still, sometimes she wondered if that Yamamba was being nice to her so she could just sort of fatten her up and eat her eventually. But at last the woman said, "The people in my village will be so worried. Please, I need to go back to them." And the Yamamba said, I know you need to go to your home. I am so glad you came, and I want to send you something that you can share with the people of your village. And I do hope that you will come back sometime, because I want to assure you and your people that I will be watching over you and the people in your village with love and care. And at that, she handed the old woman a beautiful piece of gold brocade. And then the Yamamba's baby came, and the old woman climbed on the baby's back, and whoosh, they were off and down, over, and then right in the middle of the village. And the baby took off for home, and the old woman began walking towards her home. And she kept hearing a terrible, mournful sound. "Oh," she said, it's a death event. Somebody in the village has died. Oh, I need to go and be with my friends." And as she moved towards her house, the door was closed and the sound was coming from inside. And she stood outside and said, "Who has died? Who has gone?" And from inside she heard, "Oh, the old woman who climbed the mountain. The Yamamba has eaten her." And at that, the old woman opened the door and said, "No, here I am." And all those people inside looked at her with horror and said, "Oh, the Yamamba has come back in the shape of the old woman. You are dead. you are dead. And the old woman said, I am not dead, and I'm not a ghost. Come over here. Feel my old bones. They are still strong. And the people did. And oh, they were so happy to see her. Oh, and she told them all about the Yamamba and her adventures on the mountain. And then she took a scissors and cut that brocade into pieces and handed most of it to everyone in the village. And they all went home. And the old woman folded up the bit of brocade that was left. Oh, she was so tired. She could hardly wait to go to sleep. And when she woke in the morning, that small piece of brocade had transformed into a large piece. And after that, everyone in the village could have a piece of that for as much as they wanted, as long as they wanted. It continued on and on. And I understand it's true to this day in that village. And the people are no longer afraid of the Yamamba. Oh, no. When everybody thinks about something bad happening in the village, they say, oh, we don't have to worry. Our Yamamba will take care of us. And she does. And that is what they say to this very day. The Yamamba by Kathy Spagnoli. And I will tell you, if you wish to learn more about Kathy and her wonderful adventures and to have a chance to look at her many publications, please go to the Seattle Storytellers website. And there, under the newsletter archives, look to the one from this January. Barry McWilliams has written a tremendously informative piece about Kathy and her work. And when you read that, you will know Kathy better. And it's a lovely thing to have happen. And that is, there are many bridges and ways to get to stories. And Kathy has provided us with many.
I put the information about the newsletter in the chat.
In the chat. Go for it. It's wonderful. Now, on we roll. Our next storyteller, Marilyn Grevstad, hosts the first Friday story swap for the Guild. And she has been doing it for a long time. Marilyn has been a part of the Seattle Storytellers Guild for a good long time. And I remember seeing her at events whenever there was a swap or a featured teller, Marilyn would be there. If it was a house concert, Marilyn would be there. She loves stories. She loves to tell them. And we are delighted to have a gift from Marilyn tonight. Please welcome Marilyn Grevstad.
Thank you. I'm going to tell the story of the Swan Maiden. This story is told all over the world, and this particular version is the one from England. It's a story about a marriage. It's a story about bridges that are built and bridges that are torn down and bridges that are built in a marriage. One night, a hunter who used to stalk game and wild birds at night was hiding in some bushes. He was near the shore of a lake and he was waiting, hoping that a flock of geese might fly by and he could shoot them with his bow and arrow. He heard a flurry of wings and he looked up. It was not a flock of geese. It was a group of maidens dressed in feather robes. They were flying through the air. on this middle of this night. And they came down and they landed on the shore. Those maidens were beautiful. There were 7 of them, and the youngest one was the most beautiful of all. Well, they took off their robes of feathers and they went in the lake and they started splashing and playing and diving in the water and having a wonderful time. And the hunter watched them. And then he crept out from behind the bushes and he stole the feathered robe of the youngest one because he thought she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. And he took that feathered robe back into the bushes with him. Well, after those 7 maidens had splashed in water, they got out of the water and they went to put on their robes of feathers. And 6 of them put on their robes of feathers, but the smallest one couldn't find hers. And she looked and looked and she asked her sisters to help her. And they looked and looked and looked and nobody could find her robe. And then one of the swan maidens said, "I'm sorry, but we have to go. It's starting to get light. We can't be out when it's light. We will just leave you to your fate, whatever that is." And they took off. And they flew off in the air and she just sat there. She was sitting with her knees hunched up against her. And then the hunter crept out from behind the bushes and he had her feathered robe in his arms, and she begged him to please give her back her robe of feathers, but he wouldn't. He wrapped her in his cloak and took her along home with him to live. Well, they were married and they were happy. They had 2 beautiful children, a boy and a girl, and those children were kind and they were sweet. And one day, the little girl went to hide behind the wainscoting. There was a little space and she crawled in there. She was playing hide and seek with her brother and she found a robe made out of feathers. She climbed out and she took it to her mother and said, "What's this?" It was her mother's robe of feathers. She put it on. She said, "Tell your father that if he wants to find me, he must go to the land east of the sun and west of the moon." And then she took off and she flew off into the air. The next morning, the hunter came home and the little girl told him what her mother had done and what her mother had said. And that hunter knew, and those children knew, that that mother loved them with all her heart. But she was gone, and the hunter immediately set off to find her. He traveled for quite a long ways, and he saw an old man that had fallen down, and he helped that old man and sat with him and comforted him and found a place for him to sit. The old man asked him where he was going, what he was doing, and the hunter told him the whole story about his wife and her 6 sisters, and how they dressed like swans and flew around at night, and how he had brought his wife home and married her, and that now she had flown off and he was looking for her. And he said to that old man, "Do you know where the land east of the sun and west of the moon is?" "No," said the man, "but I can ask." He stood up, and it happened that that man was the king of all the beasts, and he whistled this loud, shrill whistle, and animals came from everywhere. The land was filled with hundreds of animals, and that king of the beasts said, "Does any of you know where the land east of the sun and west of the moon is?" There was silence. No one knew. "I'll tell you what," said the king of the beasts. "You should go to my brother, the king of the birds. maybe he can help you. And he told the hunter how to find his brother. And he traveled and found the king of the birds. And he asked him the same question. Can you help me find out where the land east of the sun and west of the moon is? He said, well, I don't know, but I'll ask. And then that king of the birds whistled, sharp, loud whistle. And pretty soon, birds came from everywhere and the whole sky got dark. And the king of the birds said, does any of you know where the land east of the sun and west of the moon is? And there was silence. None of them knew. Well, said the king of the birds, why don't you go ask my brother, the king of the fishes? And he told the hunter how to find the king of the fishes. The king traveled and he came to the king of the fishes. He said, I'm trying to find the land east of the moon and east of the sun and west of the moon. Do you know where that is? No, but I'll ask. And then that king of the fishes whistled, loud, sharp whistle. And they were standing on the shore of the sea, and the water just filled up with all of these fish. And the king of the fishes says, does any of you know where the land east of the sun and west of the moon is? But no one did. Well, the hunter started to turn around and leave, and then he heard, wait a minute. And just then a dolphin who had arrived late came up to the shore and said, I don't know exactly where it is, but I've heard it's on the top of Crystal Mountain beyond the wild forest. And the hunter thought, on top of Crystal Mountain. Now, it wasn't the Crystal Mountain where you go skiing. It was a different Crystal Mountain. So the hunter traveled and he traveled, and he was just about to get to the wildwood. There was a huge meadow, and two men were having a quarrel. And he said, what's the matter? And they said, maybe you can help us. We have this problem. One of them said, I'm the older brother. Our father just recently died, and he left us two things. He left us a cap that when you put it on your head, it makes you invisible, and a pair of shoes that when you put them on your feet, you can wish yourself wherever you want to go. Well, I think as the older brother, I should have the total choice of the two. My brother says, no matter what, he is entitled to the cap of invisibility. How are we going to solve this problem? So the hunter thought, and he said, okay, I've got an idea. He said, do you see that tree way, way over there? Yeah. Well, I will say ready, set, go, and then two of you run to that tree, touch it, and run back, and whoever gets here first, I will have the cap of invisibility in this hand, I will have the shoes of swiftness in this hand, and that person can have his choice. I thought that was a good idea, and so the hunter said, get ready, get set, go, and off they ran where they had just started running when that hunter grabbed the cap of invisibility, put on his head, and he grabbed the shoes of swiftness and put those on his feet, and he wished himself to the top of Crystal Mountain. When he got there, he asked someone, is this the land east of the sun and west of the moon? Yeah. Is there a king? Oh yeah, we have a king, and that king, he has 7 beautiful daughters. They put on robes of feathers and they fly all over the place. I'd like to talk to the king. And so that stranger took him to the king, and he said, oh, hail, mighty king. I've come for my wife. She is one of your 7 daughters. Oh, said the king. Well, I'll tell you what. If you can tell me which of my daughters is your wife, she can go with you. And then he brought out his daughters, his beautiful daughters, and each one looked exactly alike. But the hunter touched each of their hands, he went down the row and he said, this is my wife. It is your wife, said the king. How did you know? Well, said the hunter, my wife used to love to make clothing for our children. She made so many darling little dresses for our daughter and so many nice shirts for our son. And she did so much sewing that she pricked her forefinger over and over and over, and the end of it is rough. That's how I knew my wife. The king said, yes, indeed. And he loaded them up with precious gifts, and he showed them a sure way to get down the Crystal Mountain, and they headed for home. They stopped on the way, just beyond the wild wood, to give the two brothers back their cap and their shoes. But then they continued. They got home, and they lived happily. That family was so happy for years and years and years.
Thank you, Marilyn. Oh, what a lovely story with so many great traditional elements in it, you know, from other stories and woven together so beautifully, just like those feather capes. Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you. Our next teller, Mary DeSane. If I were to say she is multi-talented, it would be an understatement, because you can probably guess, looking at her there with her harp, that she is a musician, and yes, she is. And because she's on a story swap, yes, she's a storyteller, but much more than that. Over time, Mary has hosted wonderful radio programs interviewing tellers, world famous storytellers, as well as telling her own tales. And she's a writer. And I must just impart to you the title of I do believe it is her latest book, called I Was a Rock Star. Now, you might find that incongruous, given the woman sitting there looking sweet and docile with a harp. But do not be deterred, my friend. So take a look on Amazon and take a look at Mary's book, and you will be able to discover the many sides of Mary DeSane. She has graced concerts in Port Angeles over the years with her music, as well as so many other places. And wherever she goes, we all leave richer for the experience of hearing what she has to share with us. Please welcome Mary DeSane.
Oh, Pat, thank you. That was lovely. Thank you. Harps have an incredible history. There were harps in China in like 500 AD. There are numerous places in Africa where there were harps. There were harps in South America. Venezuela has very distinctive styles of harps. Has had harp for 5,000 years. And Ireland has a very rich connection to harps. There was a couple. Queel was the husband. Conalach was the wife. And when they were first together, they were happy. Hardships did not seem to touch them. They farmed their little gardens. They caught wildlife. They did chores for other farmers. They did well. However, as years passed, fortune did not smile on them. Crops did not grow well. The soil was rocky and hard. The game was harder to catch. And there was a bitterness that came between them. They started to see faults with each other that they had not seen before. And over time, as their bitterness grew, they talked to each other less and less. And each of them, unspoken to the other, decided to forsake the other and leave. And so it was. One late winter morning, Kanalak woke up about 2 hours before sunrise. She heard her husband still sleeping. She rolled her blankets up and pushed him against his back. She got dressed and she headed for the seashore. She knew that once out there were fishing villages, there were farmers, there were plenty of things where she could find work. And off she went. About an hour or so later, her husband Kuya woke up. He felt the roll of blankets behind him and he thought it was his wife was still sleeping. So he too said, "I'm leaving." He dressed quietly. He took off on that same trail to the seashore, knowing that he also could find work in the fishing villages, on a boat, in a farm, chopping wood. And off he went. It was mid-afternoon when Kanaluk came up over a dune, and she heard this eerie sound that she had never heard before. What was it? And as she came over down onto the strand, there coming up out of the sand were the ribs of a whale. And from it were hanging sinews, and it was the wind coming through those sinews that was making this sound. Kanalak was captivated by this. She was tired, thought she'd rest a little bit. She sat down on the sand, and before long she was asleep. It wasn't long after that when Kuil also heard that eerie sound. What was that? It was music, but not music. He came over that dune as well, and he saw the rib bones of the whale. He saw the wind was coming through the sinews, and he heard the sound. And in moments, he saw his wife asleep there in the sand. He was filled with remorse. He said, "Oh, I have wronged her. What can I ever do to make it up to her?" And he looked and he listened. He went into the nearby woods and he cut 3 branches of a yew tree and he tied them together so it was a big triangle. And he went to the whale and he took some of those sinews and he put them on that triangle of wood and he started to pluck them. And it wasn't long before Kanalak woke up. She looked around a little bit and there was her husband. And she too, "Oh, I left him. What have I done? How can we ever make this right?" And the two of them talked. And they agreed to try again. And they built a cottage in the woods and they made an agreement to each other, good or bad, they would always talk to each other. And they played their harp and they built a new life together, stronger and with a foundation. And the people who heard their harp were filled with contentment.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you. I always think when Mary plays her harp that the fairies are dancing. And indeed they are this evening and will be so tomorrow night and beyond. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you, everyone.
Our next teller, Sarah Stein, was a children's librarian for many years in New York, I believe, Sarah. And I have a feeling, having heard Sarah in several occasions, that if I was a child at one of her story sessions, I would willingly sit crisscross applesauce on the floor and listen to whatever she had to share. When she came out here to the Northwest, she decided to form a Portland Storytellers Guild. She put a little ad in a library newsletter, I guess, and Ken Iverson answered it, and I don't know which. I think it was a duet of brilliance. They founded the Portland Storytellers Guild, which is going hard and strong, 30 years or more. Please welcome Sarah Stein.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you. I wanted to tell a Jewish story. It was written by a famous Rabbi Nachman, who lived in the 19th century in Eastern Europe. He wrote mostly fairy tales, but this story is more a parable. Now, the meaning of the story, everyone has a different interpretation. The one that's usually accepted is that an old rabbi is trying to get a younger student to return to his religion. He has lost his way, and this rabbi wants to bring him back. But there are many interpretations. I'll leave it up to you. So enough of the introduction. Let's start the story. There was once a prince who suddenly decided that he was a rooster. He took off his clothes, and instead of doing what princes are supposed to do, like look for a princess, rule his kingdom, and slay a dragon, well, this prince, as I said, took off his clothes, went under the table, and started eating kernels of corn. Of course, the father, the king, was very unhappy that his son had gone in this terrible direction. He called the best doctors in the kingdom to come and make his son normal, but they all failed. And the prince was perfectly happy being a rooster. He preened his feathers and went cock-a-doodle-doo, cock-a-doodle-doo. One day, a wise man came to the king's palace and said, "I can cure your son. Give me a week." The king was skeptical because no one else could help. How could this wise man help? But he had nothing to lose. So he said, "Okay, you're my son." This wise man then took off his clothes, went under the table, and started eating corn. "Who are you?" asked the prince. "I am a rooster, just like you." "And who are you?" asked the wise man. "I'm also a rooster." Well, they had something in common. They both ate corn, and they both preened their feathers, and they both went cock-a-doodle-doo. So they became good friends. That was what the wise man wanted. He went from out of under the table and put on clothes, human clothes. And the rooster prince said, "What are you doing? A rooster should not wear clothes." Why not? Said the wise men. You can be a rooster and wear clothes. It doesn't change you. Oh, thought the prince, that makes kind of sense, and I am a bit cold. So he put on clothes. Then the wise man said to one of the servants, bring us some food. Bring us human food. Very good food, which the prince did not want to eat. And the wise men started eating the food. Why are you eating human food? A rooster does not eat human food. I am a rooster. I will never change. But this food is much better than corn. Believe me. Would you like some? The prince hesitated, but then he thought, it looks pretty good. Huh? Okay, so he also ate the food. Then the wise men got out from under the table and stood up on his 2 feet like a human being. What are you doing? Asked the prince. Come back under the table. Roosters don't do that. Well, I can do it if I want to. And I'm still a rooster. You see that? It's not a problem. And this continued until the prince was cured. And the king was very thankful that now he had his son back, who, for all we know, still thinks he's a rooster and looks like a human being. And he gave the wise men a huge reward. And the wise men walked away feeling happy and feeling that he had really helped this prince find his true identity. Thank you.
Oh, Sarah, I shall never look at a chicken quite the same after hearing that story. Thank you. What a delightful story. The visuals, just the visuals. Thank you. You'd think after this time with Zoom and lots of tutorials and patience from Barry, but so Barry McWilliams is a man who wears many hats. He's fondest of the purple hat that he just showed you a slide of, but he is past president of the Seattle Storytellers Guild. He puts together our wonderful quarterly newsletter that is just full of information that goes beyond the Seattle area. And he was so responsible for enabling storytelling to continue during Zoom. I like that hat, Barry. He really is just a very important part of the Seattle Storytellers Guild. And tonight we get to hear him share a story with us. Please welcome Barry McWilliams.
Yes, I would like to share a story from China. And, you know, we celebrate Valentine's Day in February, but in the Far East, their Valentine's celebration is on the 7th day of the 7th month of the lunar calendar, which basically falls in early August. This year it's August 10th. And they celebrate it with a number of festivals. They're very significant festivals. They're folk festivals. The Qi Festival in China is well known and has been celebrated for a couple thousand years, I think, at least as far back as the Han Dynasty. And also there's a festival in Japan. They call it the Tanabata Festival. There's also one in Korea that is the Chilshuk Festival. And they all fall on that date. And they all basically have at their roots the same story. This is the story that is the basis of these things. This story goes way back. We have versions in poetry that date back hundreds and hundreds of years. And the story is commonly called the Cowherd and the Weaver Girl. Sometimes it's called the seventh story, but I'm going to entitle it the Bridge of the Magpies. And this is the story of the Bridge of the Magpies. Now we know that there's a heavenly kingdom up in the sky, and up there the Jade Emperor rules with the Queen of the West, and he has great power. And just like on earth, there's a mandarin, and there are those that wait on him, and there are servants and many children. So it was the Jade King, the Jade Emperor, and his queen had many daughters, the youngest of which was named Xenu. Now, Xenu was a weaver, and her job, her task in the kingdom was to sit up in her high tower and weave. And she weaved the beautiful, colorful skyscapes. And at night, she weaved tapestries of stars in the sky. And she was a wonderful weaver, but it was very lonely in that tower. There was no one to talk to except her loom, and it was just shuttle back and shuttle back and shuttle back. And she was lonely, and as she gazed out the window in the daytime, she could see far down below her a very lonely man. Now, this man was named Nylog. Nylog was a ox driver, a cowherd. His job was to take the oxen and plow the paddies and scatter the seed and water the rice and cause the fields to grow. But it was also a very lonely task. He had no one to talk to but his plow and his ox, neither one of which were noted for conversation. But he would often look up in the sky, especially at night, and there was one star way up in the top of the sky. It was so bright and flashy, and he loved to see that star in the late summer looking down at him. He imagined it was a beautiful maiden, perhaps, a beautiful maiden up there in the sky. Well, as all young girls are known to do, occasionally they sneak out on their parents to have some fun. And so it was that the daughters of the Jade Emperor and the Queen of the West occasionally would go down to Earth and have some fun. And they snuck out one night, and they were playing in the reflection of a pond. They were flitting around like little stars on the water and splashing and laughing and having a good time. And nearby, the cowherd was with his ox sleeping, and he woke up and he heard their laughter and he heard the kidding and he heard the splashing, and he was curious as to what was going on. And he went and he looked, and lo, there on the bushes were a bunch of beautiful, beautiful silk robes. And he picked one up, and it was so soft and delicate and so beautifully woven. But just about then, the girls emerged from the water, and when they saw him, they shrieked and they screamed and they grabbed their robes and they flew up into the sky. All except for one. He was holding a robe, and he looked at her, and she looked at him, and she looked up, and he looked down, and she was so beautiful, delicate, petite, but so beautiful. Black hair, perfectly brushed, and her eyes, they sparkled like a star in the sky. He was just almost could swim in the beauty of her eyes. And she looked up at him, and oh, he was so strong, a little muddy, but his skin was so bronzed and his eyes were so warm. Now, she had recognized immediately this was the man she had watched plowing the fields. And she knew he was both strong, but also that he was kind, because she observed the way he cared for his oxen, the way he brushed them down and fed them so carefully. She knew he was a good man. And they looked at each other and they started to talk. She introduced herself. I am Zihu. I'm a weaver, a heavenly weaver. I am Nilang, and I am a ox driver. I'm also a very lonely ox driver. All I have is my plow and my ox. Yeah, and all I have is my loom and to look out into the emptiness. No one talks to me. Well, we're both lonely people, I guess. And they talked and they talked. She was not afraid of him. She was not eager to flee. And finally, when he offered her robe to her, she didn't take it. She had come to a decision. She was going to take on a robe of an ordinary woman and live with this wonderful man, because the two of them had fallen instantly in love with each other. It was love at first sight, and they were just totally absorbed in each other's eyes. And so she chose to become an ordinary woman and live with this man. And she went about her weaving, and she wove clothes for him and for her two children that were born, a boy and a girl. And he worked hard with his ox, but he knew when he got home at night that she would be waiting there, and they could embrace and they could share the day together. And it was not going to be loneliness anymore. Well, in the heavenly realms, time is very different. What would be years on earth was a matter of days in the heavenly realms. So it was a while before they noticed that the daughter, Zilu, had not returned. She was missing. The Jade King was concerned. The Jade Emperor sent out his guards to search through the skies, to scrounge around looking for her. They could not find her. The queen was very upset because, her daughter was supposed to be doing that weaving and weaving brocades for her and curtains, as it were. But they were not getting done. Well, finally, a guard came and reported, "We have found your daughter. She's down on earth. She's living with a human, a mortal human. And worse, he is nothing more than a lowly ox driver." But the Jade Emperor was just totally upset. This is not right. A heavenly being living with a commoner, a ox driver. And the queen was upset too. Who's going to weave my curtains? And so the king ordered the guards to go down and bring her home. Well, they were asleep at night in his hut, content in their arms, when the guards rushed in and snatched her away, and they ran out the door and they took off with her. Well, he rose up and looked. He didn't even think about the children at the time. He just ran to his ox and climbed aboard and spurred the ox on to chase her. And he was reaching out for her, and she was reaching out for him. And they reached and he reached, but they could not quite catch up with each other when the queen of the West whipped out her golden chrome and ripped it across the sky and created a great gash out of which poured a great silver river of stars between them. Well, the daughter returned to her tower in the sky and resumed her weaving, and he returned to his oxen and resumed his plowing. But they were both filled with such sadness and loneliness, and they often looked up. He looked up at the sky, and she looked down to him, and there was such sorrow, and they were so broken in their hearts. Their love was feeling so crushed and broken, and so her weaving never quite got done. Her heart was no longer in that weaving, and he became negligent with his oxen. He was oftentimes unable to get up in the morning to go to work. He failed to feed them at times. At times they would break loose and trample through neighbors' paddies and cause all kind of havoc, and things were just not right. Well, the Jade Emperor started to realize that, well, maybe his heart was softening a little bit towards this daughter of his who had gone down and married that cowherd. And he thought, well, it's not right that heavenly beings should consort with earthly folks, but I will make a decree that one day a year they can meet on a bridge over the Silver River and embrace and share their love. For now they were silently watching. They could not talk to each other, though they could see each other. They could not embrace and share their love. But for one day, he said, the 7th day of the 7th month, they will be able to meet on a bridge over the Silver River and share their love. And the queen said, that's good. She can work on the brocade and she'll be back to work the next day. Well, the Jade Emperor ordered the crows and the ravens to get to work and build a bridge. And they went to work all right. They gathered sticks and stones, and they could not agree on where to put them, and they argued and they bickered a lot. And as it went on and went on, it just got worse and worse. No bridge was built. The day was almost here. There were foundations, but no way to cross that great expanse of silvery stars. And then the magpies noticed. Now, the magpie is a very special bird in the Far East. It's a beautiful bird. It's white and black, and the Asian magpie has blue wings. They have long, pointed tails. They're birds about the size of a crow, maybe a little bit smaller, but they're a symbol of joy and happiness and prosperity in the Far East. In fact, it's the national bird of Korea. Well, the magpies noticed this couple, and their hearts were overflowing with sorrow for this love affair that had gone so wrong. And so the magpies, as a tremendous flock on the 7th day of the 7th month, they rose up in the sky together, and they locked their wings together, and they created a great bridge across that river. And Xenu looked and saw that bridge, and she saw her lover on the far side, and he looked at that bridge, a bird's wings nonetheless, but he saw his lover on the other side, and they started to step gingerly, carefully, and finally they ran together and embraced in the center of that bridge. And they embraced and shared words of love and assurance, and they touched each other. It was a wonderful moment. And then there were tears, because they knew that they were going to have to leave one another until the next year, when once again they could be joined together. Now, as they had run across that bridge, their feet, his rough sandals and her delicate slippers, had scuffled the feathers on the magpies to the point where many of the magpies were practically bald. But the magpies did not care, because they had united these lovers even for a moment. It was a wonderful time. And that is why they celebrate in the Far East these festivals, which are celebrations of love, because they celebrate the fact that two lovers, separated by so much, were able to be united again with the help of these wonderful magpies. And so it is, as we look up over the sky at night, we see Vega, we see Deneb, we see Altair, we see Vega, we call her the harp, the constellation of the harp. We see Deneb, and it's the constellation of the swan, Cygnus. We see Altair, and it's the constellation of the eagle. But if you go into the Far East and look up at the sky at the beginning of August, at the time of the 7th day of the 7th month, they look up and they see the constellation of Xenu, the weaver. And they look across that silver river, the Milky Way, and they see the constellation of the ox, Nilag, what we call the star Altair. And then they look and they see the constellation of the magpie. His tail, Deneb, the star, stretches out from his head there. The wings, you see, cross over the Milky Way and enable them to once again be united. And so it is that in China and in Korea and in Japan and in many southeastern countries, we gather on the 7th day of the 7th month. The young girls put on beautiful robes, and they offer prayers and wishes to the weaver in the sky that they might too have a wonderful marriage of love. They think of the possibility of perhaps meeting a wonderful, strong, and kind man like the ox herder. And they're all thankful that the magpies made a bridge between heaven and earth.
I like that.
Oh, thank you, Barry. Wonderful, wonderful imagery.
Love
And I am so glad everything turned out all right. That's my kind of a story. Thank you. Well, our next storyteller, Marty Falshore, loves stories. She doesn't like to just love them and leave them. Marty likes to take a story and sometimes stretch it just a bit. So let's see what she has in store for us tonight. Please welcome Marty.
Thank you, Pat. Abdullah was the richest man in town. In fact, he was probably the richest man in the whole village and maybe the whole country. He was so rich that his clothes that he wore were rags. They were tattered. They were torn. They were whatever he could get out of the clothing bank of the stuff that nobody else wanted, so he could just take it. His winter coat was pretty much moth-eaten, full of holes, not really worth much for winter wear. His shoes, he was so rich, his shoes didn't exist. He went barefoot pretty much all the time. And if he needed shoes in winter, he would just wrap his feet in rags and go out like that. But his palace, he was so rich. It was basically a one-room shack made of wood, very little chinking left. And his roof leaked, so the weather would come in whenever it wanted, and he just went with it. He had a small wooden table and a rocky chair, not a rocking chair, but a rocky chair, because it barely would hold up for him, and a small cook stove that he would use whatever cow pies he could find, or old peat, or if a coal train was going by, he would follow the coal train and pick up whatever coal fell off of the train. But his feasts, he loved to eat, and he was so rich that what he ate was whatever he could find in his neighbor's tray, or restaurants where they threw out stuff, or at the stores where they threw out stuff. And if it was on sale, he would go out and spend a few pennies on some cat food or some dog food or something like that. Now and then his neighbors, who knew he actually wasn't as poor as he pretended, his neighbors would come to ask for help, because everybody except Abdullah was relatively poor in this little village. And they would come to ask for help. And he would look at them and say, "Look at me. Do I look like I'm made of money? Go away. I have nothing for you." And they would go away and eventually learn not to even bother. And every night after Abdullah had his feast of whatever it was he could find, or his cat or dog food, he would sit with all his little money bags and count his money to make sure nothing was missing. And this would take a couple of hours because he kept accumulating more money the older he got. And it would take hours to count all that money and make sure nothing was missing except those few pennies he may have spent for cat or dog food. And after a few years of this, he thought, you know, it really takes a lot of time counting all this money. I think I'm going to go trade it in for a hunk of gold, and then it'll be easy to keep track of. So he took all those bags of money from their hiding place and put them in a big box and walked his way to the train station. And he got on the train and he took it to the nearest town. And then he took it to the next nearest town and the next nearest town until he was sure no one in the town would know, his village, that is, would know where he went or what he was doing. And he took that box of money and he traded it for a hunk of gold, saving out some coins so he could go home and just in case cat or dog food went on sale. And he carried that box back home and set it on his table, admired it because, it was beautiful, just shining gold, just beautiful. And then he thought, this would be way easier to steal than all those bags of money. What was I thinking? So he thought about it and decided that after everybody in the village had gone to sleep, he would bury the gold out by a disused well that nobody went to anymore because it was dry. And that's what he did. He carried it out to the well with a shovel, dug a hole, carefully saving the sod, put the gold in the hole, covered it back up, laid the sod on so nobody could tell that it was dug up. And then he went home and slept. The next morning, he went through his usual day, and that night he went to bed, and then he thought, what if someone went and got at my gold? So after everybody else in the village was asleep, he went out again and checked, and it was safe, and he could sleep. And this went on night after night after night for months. And one of the villagers noticed, there's a little path leading from Abdullah's house to the old disused well. Why would Abdullah be going to the well? It must be because something valuable is there. So that night, the neighbor sat and watched and saw Abdullah go out to the well and look around and then go back home. The next night, that neighbor took a shovel, watched, waited for Abdullah to check out the well. And when Abdullah went back to his house, the neighbor dug around, and it was really easy to find where the gold was. He dug a hole, found it, and ran off with it after refilling the hole and putting the sod back. And he ran back to his house with the gold. The next night, Abdullah went to look, to check where the gold was. And he could tell his hiding place had been messed with. The sod wasn't quite right. And he got down and he dug with his hands, and his gold was gone. And he started pulling his hair and wringing his eyes and screaming, "Oh my God, it's gone! What can I do? It's gone! It's gone!" And he's sobbing, and he woke up the whole village. And they all came out to find out what tragedy had happened. And they're like, "Abdullah, what happened?" And Abdullah said, "Oh, my gold, it is gone. It's a tragedy. What am I going to do? My life is over. My gold is gone." And one neighbor came forward and said, "Abdullah, what's the big deal? Just take a rock and bury a rock in that hole." And Abdullah said, "Why are you making fun of me? This is a tragedy." And the neighbor said, It's not a tragedy, and I'm not making fun of you. For all the gold that gold did you, for all the good that gold did you, you might as well just bury a rock. That's Abdullah's Gold, a story from India. Thank you.
Thank you, Marty. Thank you. Well, our next teller is from India, a teller I have not had the pleasure of hearing, and because of the time difference in India, I believe it's in the morning there. Is that correct, Shilpa?
Yeah. It started at 8:30 here, and now it's 9 o'clock, 9:10.
Well, thank you for getting up and being willing to share a story with us. I understand you have been able to share stories with the Guild in the past, and we are so pleased, considering it is World Storytelling Day, to have a story from your part of the world. Please welcome Shilpa Mehta from India.
Hello everyone. Thank you so much. And I'm Shilpa Mehta. I am a storyteller based in India. Today, I am telling a drop of honey. Well, most of us like to eat honey, yes? But can you imagine what would happen with a drop of honey? Well, long time ago, one fine morning, a king was sitting with his minister in the courtyard of his palace. While they chatted, they ate some rice cookies with honey. The king laughed loudly at some remark which the minister had made. He waved his arms and accidentally spilled some honey on the edge of the courtyard. The minister was about to call a servant to wipe up the honey when the king waved the hand to stop him. Oh, don't bother. It's only a drop of honey, and it's not our problem. The two men continued talking to each other and completely forgot about the drop of honey. The honey, however, slowly trickled down the courtyard on the path below. A fly came buzzing by and ate some honey. While it was enjoying the honey, a lizard darted out and swallowed the fly. The sudden movement of the lizard woke up a cat which was sleeping at the side of the street. The cat jumped after the lizard, which quickly darted away, and just at that moment, a dog trotted by. When it saw the cat jump, it began to bark furiously. Soon the quiet street was filled with mewing and barking of cat and dog. Again, the minister was about to call a servant to go and deal with the brawling cat and dog when the king said, "Relax. The cat and dog belong to the marketplace. We shouldn't interfere. And it's not our problem." All this noise brought two women out of their houses who were the owners of the cat and the dog. The owner of the cat, she threw a stick at the dog to chase it away. The owner of the dog shouted at her, "Leave my dog alone and take that nasty cat away." And they began to shout at each other, and now the husbands of both the women came out. And what happened next? Yes, each husband took his wife's side, and they finally came to blows. Now the frightened children, they called their uncles and families to come and help. They all joined in the fight. Within minutes, the street was full of struggling men and women. This awful noise Again, it reached the king and his minister, who were still sitting there in the courtyard. The king eyed the minister and said, "I know what you are thinking, but the army will handle it, and besides, it's not our problem." Now the guards ran out and ordered everyone to stop fighting, but nobody listened to the commands. Finally, the chief guard ordered his men to draw their weapons. With the swords in their hands, the guards, they rushed upon the people, and several men were killed. This made the people of the city very angry. They rebelled, and the riot escalated into a civil war with looting and destruction all over the city. The magnificent city, it was reduced to a pile of smoking ashes. And here, the king and the minister, they stood rooted to the spot where they had been watching all day. Their mouths were hanging open in horror, and the king said to his minister, "Well, I think that maybe that little drop of honey was our problem." So that was a folktale from India, A Little Drop of Honey. And you will find various versions of it, like the That's Not Our Fault. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. What a wonderful story, so well told, and a good reminder at what is our problem and how to handle it. A wonderful contribution to World Storytelling Day.
Loved it.
Well, our final teller tonight, Rebecca Halm, was born and comes from the cornfields of Iowa, where she grew up, riding bicycles down dusty roads. And she has pedaled far and wide over time. She has visited, I don't know how many continents and lands, and always comes back with a story or two to tell. She is recently back from the Netherlands. And so tonight, Rebecca, take us home.
All right. Well, I'm not taking you to the Netherlands tonight, but I will take you first to Bosnia. And the reason that I'm wearing this red necklace is from my Bosnian friend who taught me about mashallah. And since we're in the first month, the month of Ramadan, and celebrating, I wanted to offer up this story, Muslim story, in honor of my friend Azra. This is a Nasruddin story. Nasruddin came into the village to lend wisdom and lend instruction. When he came to the people and he said, "Do you know what I will be speaking on today?" And all of the people were so intimidated and so awed by Nasruddin's reputation that, of course, they all said, "No, we don't know what you will offer to us. We don't know the wisdom that you know." And Nasruddin looked at them and said, "Well, how can you expect me to teach anyone who has no idea at all?" And he left. 2 weeks later, Nasruddin returned a second time to the village. And he said to the people, "Do you know what I will be speaking on today?" Now, remembering what had happened on the previous encounter, all of the people wanted to appear very engaged and ready. And they said, yes, Mullah, we have been studying and we are ready to receive you. We know what you will speak about. And Nasruddin said, "Well, then You have no need of me. And he left.
Yeah.
A third week came, and Nasruddin, being the wise fool and the foolish wise man that he was, came back to the village once again. He came to the crowd of people and said, "Do you know what I will be speaking on today?" Now, the people who believed that they were much wiser fools than they had been on the last two encounters, had a plan. Half of the crowd said, "No, Nasruddin, we don't know. We need you." And the other half of the crowd said, "Yes, yes, we do know what you will teach." And Nasruddin said, "Excellent, wonderful. The ones of you who know, tell the ones of you who don't." That is what I came here to teach you. When you have something, when you have knowledge, when you have food, when you have a bit of kindness, share it with the ones who don't.
True words, true words. Well, it has been a wonderful evening of storytelling, and storytelling not only from live from various parts of the world, but also stories from so many different traditions. And as you think about it, you know, there is connection there, a bridge, the similarities, and then also the wonder of hearing a story for the first time. It's why storytelling deserves a World Storytelling Day. Now, when there are holidays of significance, sometimes one thinks in terms of bringing a present of some kind. Well, we have all had the gift of storytelling tonight. So thank you, one and all, for coming to listen, for coming to tell, and we wish you all happy tales. Barry, I turn it over to you.